And we're back for another episode of Standpoint. I'm Gabe Groisman. Usually we do this surprise reveal of who our guest is, but we've got one camera now so everyone can see. With me is Congresswoman Elise Stefanik. Elise, thank you so much for joining.
Great to be with you.
You know, we're here in the JNS booth at the Republican Jewish Coalition. We've got a convention here in Vegas with thousands of people, it looks like, and it's been a great weekend. So thank you for spending some time here chatting.
Of course. I have long been friends with the RJC, with the Republican Jewish Coalition, and this is the most important election of our lifetime, I believe. And I know we say that every election cycle, but the future of the United States, but also the security and our strongest, most precious ally in the world, Israel, that's at stake as well this election cycle. So I'm glad to see there's well over 1,000 people here. We need to make sure everyone gets out to vote this November. Yeah,
the difference couldn't be more stark between the two candidates. I think we live in a crazy time, however, where people get different information from different places. They think they have different facts. Of course, there's only one set of facts, but it makes it even more difficult to try to convince people, bring over the independents, bring over the Democrats that are reasonable, because there's still some out there. I know some of them, and they're all struggling with this stark difference because Kamala is not the typical Democrat that's running for president. I think by far she's the most liberal presidential candidate that we've had.
Yes, and her record supports that statement. It is a fact that she was the most liberal United States senator. When it comes to her, it's a lack of support for Israel. So I don't want to say, look at her support for Israel. She has not supported Israel. She's turned her back on Israel. She was the last person in the room during Joe Biden's decision to withdraw from Afghanistan. She supports defunding the police. She supports banning fracking. She has supported cutting our military. She has withheld military aid from Israel. So on both the national security issues and the domestic issues, she is the most far-left radical Democrat that we've ever seen running for president. And I also think it's important to take a step back. While the media attacks Republicans falsely, as though we're attacking democracy, we're defending democracy in our constitutional republic. It was the Democrats that, without a single vote having been cast anywhere in the country by a primary voter, Kamala Harris was just swapped in to replace Joe Biden because of Joe Biden's abysmal poll numbers. That is the opposite, the antithesis of democracy. Not a single vote was cast, and she was just put on the ballot.
Yeah, and the scarier part of that is it's obviously true. And the scariest part of that is the media really just glossed it over. Like, it wasn't really a big deal that she was anointed. It's like they could say, look, this was a situation, these are the rules in the Democratic Party, that's all true. Right, but it should be a big deal. Right?
Absolutely.
And somehow it's not.
And that was shocking to me even, although I guess there's no low for the mainstream media. But the fact that it was brushed under the rug and it's not really even talked about by the media, that's the first time in my lifetime and probably modern American history that that's ever happened, potentially ever in American history.
Yeah, it's crazy. And the last point, and then we'll get to all these things I want to talk to you about when we're talking about a potential Kamala Harris presidency, right? The biggest risk, I think, domestically, is that if you look at the philosophy, the judicial, I'm a lawyer, so I go to judicial philosophy, but the political philosophy of DEI and ESG and quote-unquote, anti-racist policies, all this wokeness that is really at the root of so many of the issues that we're seeing here in our country, is sort of the lens through which many in the Democratic Party, and for sure in academia, which we'll get to in a little bit, see the world. And that's where the Jews are always at the losing end of that as well. But it's not just the Jews, it's Americans as a whole and America as a whole. And she's at the forefront of that, right? So we're going to have, if we were to have that as a president, that policy in the Oval Office, the danger it can't be understated.
It is the most dangerous potential presidency certainly in my lifetime. And you're exactly right. When you look at ESG and DEI, fundamentally those are un-American. That is the opposite of what our founding principles are, which is equality of opportunity, not equity of outcomes. It also is merit-based and the pursuit of excellence and the pursuit of happiness. DEI and ESG are so many of the problems we see today, particularly as it relates to this intellectual and academic rot in our higher ed institutions at the colleges and universities, and they're inherently anti-Semitic, which is what I talked about during my speech at RJC today.
Yeah, amazing. So, there's so many things you're saying that I just want to pull the yarn and get deeper in it, but just take a step back. You've been in Congress for 10 years now. Mm-hmm. You were the youngest member of Congress at age 30, I guess, when you came out of your working for George W. Bush. It was pretty, I'm sure, a pretty incredible experience. And here you are, you're on armed services, you're on intelligence, you're on education and workforce, and more. and you seem to be absolutely everywhere. Even scheduling this interview was, and your staff, who I'm friends with, they're amazing. They're like, Gabe, we promise we want to do it. The schedule is incredible. But you're also a mom, and for me, family is first. And there's so many problems in the world, and when everyone wants to solve the problems, I always tell them the same thing. First, make sure you're good at home, because you got to start in your house. So how do you? Let's talk just a little bit, whatever you're comfortable sharing. How do you balance, being a mom and having a family and doing all the amazing work you do for the general public?
Well, family is first for me as well. And this week, I'll give you an example. My son turned 3 the end of August. He started pre-K 3. So I was probably more nervous as a mom than he was walking into that classroom. Way, yeah. But he did great. And that's why I'm proud to be here today. But I'm in and out to get back to continue to work on behalf of my constituents, but also be the best mom I can be. And we're both active parents, my husband and I, and we both have careers. So it's a juggle like so many other families, and we are really blessed to have the support of additional family members, extended family, that help us both balance the careers and being parents. But I will tell you, becoming a mom has made me a better policymaker and a better leader. First of all, I am very good at managing my time, but also I know the stakes of what we're fighting for and the future of our country, and literally see it in my son. What is the country and the world we are leaving this next generation? I think back to people are looking in this country for strong moral leadership at times when, a lot of people don't have the courage to stand up. I'm going to be very proud for my son to look back at my time in Congress, that I stood up for values with which I was raised, that I stood up for principles, and that I continued to improve the United States of America for future generations. So I balance it like every other working family. But you asked about the 10 years. 10 years, I've seen a lot of change in Congress. I came in at the tail end of President Obama's second term, was there during the historic first term of President Trump, and the abysmal, catastrophic only term of Joe Biden. And we need to save this country. That's why this election is so incredibly important.
So it's incredible that some issues somehow become politicized when they shouldn't. I'm the father of 5 girls. I'm a girl dad times 5. And I just had a discussion with my oldest daughter, who's almost 18, and my 15-year-old. They're talking about what they want to do. My oldest is going to go to college. By the way, she wants to go to the military first and then go to college. And she was talking about, I'm like, what do you want to do after? Like, she was trying to figure out what to study. And she said, well, what do you think you want to do after? You don't have to know the answers yet, but where's your mind at? She said, well, first and foremost, I want to have a family. I want to be a mom. And then we sat and had this discussion on how it's not one or the other. Like, that for sure should be your priority. Like, you want to build a home. That's the number one role. It's incredible. But it's not at the expense of, like, you can do both. You have to be able to do both. And we started talking about women who do that. And we talked about you. So, that's, for me, it's very important for young girls to see that, to have a role model where they can say, okay, you can have a family, you can work, you can do everything, and not your family's first. That's no matter what, family's first, but you can do more, especially if you have that in you. So I just wanted to.
Well, these role models are very important. I'll tell you, when I first got to Congress, I was 30 years old. I was not yet then married, did not have any children. And the woman who had the conference chair role, which is the role I play in leadership, you had all the Republican House members messaging, how we communicate with our districts, with the media. She had her 3rd child in leadership. And I saw that as a young 30-year-old new member of Congress. Had I not seen that in Kathy McMorris Rogers, who is a longtime, very respected member, I don't know if I would have had the confidence and the courage to be in leadership and also be a mom at the same time, and take on those additional responsibilities to help lead my colleagues. So those role models are very important, even at the highest levels in elected office.
Yeah, always in life, take on mentors. I always tell people, take on mentors, see other people, how they're doing it, and learn for yourself. You talk about being the conference chair, the GOP conference chair. First of all, I'd love to understand a little bit more about the role, but also how you're keeping the conference together. We know these times the conference is mostly together, but then there's issues that come up, whether it's foreign funding for Ukraine or for Israel, whether it's the budget. There's issues that come up now. The anti-Semitism bill, we didn't get, we didn't score about 1,000. We didn't get 100% of the conference together. How is that? First of all, if you could define a little bit what that role is and how you're trying to keep the conference together.
Sure. So when we talk about the conference, the Republicans refer to all the Republican members as the conference. Democrats use the term the caucus. So my responsibility as the conference chair is I run our weekly meetings, and those can be very vibrant, robust discussions about what the legislative agenda is on the floor. And then importantly, I'm responsible for how we communicate directly to the American people, whether that's our constituents or broadly, and how we message our policies. What I've tried to use as my guiding light is we're going to talk about the issues that matter to the people, not rely on the lens of the media, who sometimes is disconnected from what actually matters to the people. But my messaging strategy has been focused on Joe Biden and Kamala Harris's crises, the border crisis, the inflation crisis, the national security crisis, the energy crisis, and connect bad policies coming from Joe Biden to how it's impacting real people. That responsibility is giving other members the opportunity to shine and share their voices. And one of the aspects of being in leadership, you get to know all your colleagues and their strengths, and making sure that I'm putting our veterans out on important moments like the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan. We're putting our moms out first when it comes to, remember the baby formula shortage?
Sure.
Sam still had formula at that point, so I lived that, and my other female colleagues, we were the spokespeople on that issue. So making sure that there's opportunities for all of our members to share our message. And interestingly, the polling, I'm very proud of this, we are ahead. If you look at the top issues that American voters are concerned about, it's the economy, it's the border, it's national security, it's energy prices, which it's part of the economy as well. We are ahead on each of those issues on how we handle that. Republicans are winning Democrats. President Trump is winning against Kamala Harris.
And you're also involved, if I'm not mistaken, in identifying new candidates, recruiting new candidates. What are you seeing as far as the candidate pool of people that want to jump into the ring in Congress? It's tougher than ever. You have the magnifying glass is stronger than ever for people who want to run for Congress, and you're kind of getting a lot of people that are into politics on the side trying to run for offices. You're seeing it in districts all over the country. But are you still seeing good candidates? You want to see more? Tell us a little bit about that.
We are, and we have built this majority. Remember, we're the last line of defense. The Senate is run by Chuck Schumer, Democrats. We are literally the only backstop between single-party rule of Democrats. So we are that line, and it's because we have high-quality candidates. We look for the strongest candidates. I've met with well over 1,000 candidates over the past 10 years. You need to have a fire in the belly as to why you're running. You need to understand your district and understand you don't need to talk about what the media wants to talk about. You need to have a message on the issues that matter to your constituents and a vision for the type of representative you want to be. I also have been very proud. I launched EPAC, which is my leadership PAC, and the mission has been not to support candidates because they're women, but for those women who are also the strongest candidates in those races, support them so that we can win those seats. And we did. And we have gone from only 13 Republican women to almost 40 in just 2 cycles, wow, showing that the Democrat Party doesn't have a monopoly on women candidates, and we need to make sure they don't have a monopoly on women voters. New York is another great case study. I'm the longest serving New York Republican. At one point, this is slightly before I was there, we were down to only 1 New York Republican in the delegation. We have 10 now. We have gone on offense in key areas like Long Island, the Hudson Valley, and have flipped those 4 seats this last cycle, which is how we got the majority.
Yeah, and how does it look in November? Sort of not at the top of the ticket, we'll talk about at the end, but sort of how does holding the House look? How can we increase that majority for the GOP?
We are laser focused on increasing that majority. So first, defending all of our Republicans who are in tough seats, and New York is really the front line of that. My goal is to make sure all those members come back, all those 4 seats we flipped, as well as potential 2 pickup opportunities. And then we have pickup opportunities across the country. Democrats are a radicalized far left party. They have taken votes in support of Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. And Kamala Harris and Joe Biden have failed the American people. So have Democrats in the House. And we will hold them accountable. The American people deserve to know how their members of Congress vote. And they can run, but they're not going to hide from these inflationary policies, from catastrophic policies related to our foreign policy, turning their back on Israel. So the list is long, and we will prosecute that case. Polling looks good. I know that the media is very focused on a bump from Kamala Harris, but if you look, she is not where Joe Biden was in 2020, and in some districts, she's actually doing worse than Joe Biden was, even before he dropped out. If you look in places like Pennsylvania, where we could pick up 3-4 seats on a good year, because of her policy against fracking, she's doing worse than Joe Biden was, even at his lowest point. So that's a real opportunity for us.
It's incredible for her as much as she's not giving interviews or trying to change her positions, she has a record, and she was very open about her positions, whether it's on fracking or on wokeness or on Israel or on any of the main issues on the border, on police, on law enforcement. And I mean, she's been very open about it. So you just got to see it. The problem is getting that message to the right people. But yeah, the numbers, I looked at the same numbers. They look good for the GOP in the House, which is important. That's why I always get nervous when I see friction within the conference. But there's always going to be friction. Like I always say, if someone listens to the show and says, I didn't agree with what you said, I always say, well, thank you for listening.
Yeah.
The idea is you can hear other opinions. So you this year you made a huge splash, obviously, in the Jewish community worldwide for your work on the Education and Workforce Committee, when you had the president of the Ivy League schools in front of you and you asked your famous questions to them. Before we get into the anti-Semitism on the college campuses, which I think we've spoken about a lot on the show, and you can speak about as much as you want. It's a passionate issue for me. We always talk about how anti-Semitism is really a symptom of a greater problem. You graduated from Harvard University. You sat with the presidents. You're digging now into what's happening at these universities, the foreign funding, which we can talk about. What are the greater problems that you see just for America of what's happening in our institutions around the country?
So first, there is a sense of entitlement from these colleges and universities that they have no accountability for taxpayer dollars. It is important to point out that each of those schools that testified get about $1 billion a year of U.S. taxpayer funds. And their posture of these schools is, we don't have to answer to anybody. Now they know they have to answer to the United States Congress.
It doesn't depend on the context?
No, it does not depend on the context. So that's one. They feel that they're entitled to that. They are not. They are responsible for being good stewards of taxpayer dollars. Two, the governance structures of these universities are broken. A corporate board or other organizations would not function the way they are. And this is coming out in some of the documents that have been turned over because of our subpoena, that some board members understood that the university presidents were failing. They were giving advice that you need to condemn this anti-Semitism explicitly, specifically, and publicly, but they didn't have the governance structure to demand that. So the governance issue needs to be addressed. The third piece is tenured faculty. I was very concerned that after that hearing, both in the case of Penn and the case of Harvard and MIT, you had 95% of the faculty member support that testimony, that the vast majority of the American people know that it does not depend on the context, that you should not have university presidents say it depends on the context to call for the genocide of Jews. Americans understand that that is wrong that they testified that way, but the fact that 95% of the faculty supported the presidents rather than standing up for protection of Jewish students, it shows that the tenured system is broken as well. And then I talk about it's an academic rot. It's not just a moral rot at the leadership level, it's an academic rot. Conservatives are consistently canceled. I've been canceled. I was removed from a board of Harvard's IOP. But there's lots of conservatives that have been not allowed to speak at campuses, so these students are not exposed to the purpose of an education, which is critical thinking, which is hearing perspectives instead of silencing any pro-Israel speaker that comes on campus. So it's an intellectual rot as well. And I also say this didn't happen overnight. It's not going to be fixed overnight. Certainly this has been an earthquake, but we need to stay vigilant to make sure these institutions, that we dig them out of this rot and return to American ideals and American institutions. The other piece is the foreign funding. These higher ed institutions, they need to remember they're American institutions, and they're historic stories for each one of them. In the case of Harvard, the motto of Harvard when it was founded, which is older than our country, was Veritas e Christo, so truth in Christ et ecclesiae, and the church. Truth in Christ and the church, meaning a moral truth. They have strayed so far from that founding motto. Same with Penn, same with Yale, same with so many of these other schools. The foreign funding piece is also a rot that needs to be addressed. You have Qatari money flowing in, you have communist Chinese money flowing in, and that's going to be important for us to assert our responsibility of oversight in Congress as well.
Yeah, a lot of Saudi money as well, and the money that comes from those universities. In your questioning, I believe you were asking some questions about foreign funding, and they kept saying, "Well, yeah, well, we have donors from all
Generous
over."
donors.
Like, yes,
They avoided that question
yes.
for a reason, and we passed what's called the Deterrent Act to close the loopholes, to strengthen the reporting requirements for colleges for any sources of foreign funding, and that's going to be really important. And I believe, sadly, that these universities, some are not abiding by the law and are breaking the law and are not disclosing the sources of foreign funds.
Seems like the lobby of these countries are really pushing hard, because it's at the federal level. It seems like things have slowed down. Yes, the investigation is going on, but the reports have been out there for years of the foreign funding that's going in. It doesn't have everything, but everybody knows the foreign funding and the influence at the universities. Governors are now really taking the lead this year. Hopefully, there's a bunch of them. DeSantis is doing some, Youngkin, Kemp, to really start pushing, not just against the anti-Semitism on campus, but we're saying it being a symptom of a bigger problem. But what else are they teaching these students?
Right.
So getting rid of tenure that they have to get reviewed to make sure they don't just have, carte blanche to teach whatever they want. They can teach whatever they want. They can't brainwash, right? So that's really the biggest issue that I see. Do you see the federal government, do you see Congress, your committee, coming forward with a bill on whether is it just going to be reporting, or is there a chance that we can maybe block foreign funding?
It's all on the table.
Nations?
Blocking funding. I mean, we've blocked foreign funding from the Communist Chinese Party with Confucius Institute, so we will, that will be on the table, and certainly that's something that I'm looking at. We will likely have a report from our investigation on the Education and Workforce Committee before the end of the year, and the real block is Chuck Schumer in the Senate. So we will pass multiple bills to condemn anti-Semitism on college campuses, to have some of these higher education reforms. They're going nowhere with Chuck Schumer in the Senate. That's why we need to flip the Senate. It's so critical. And we also need Donald Trump in the White House, because if you look at the Title VI protections for Jewish students that were expanded, that happened under President Trump. And it's Joe Biden and Kamala Harris who are refusing to do the investigations of these institutions for their failure to protect Jewish students. So we need all three. We need the House, the Senate, and the White House, and then I think you will see very strong changes.
Yeah, the pressure is definitely mounting. The point that you just made on Trump and including Jews for protection under Title VI by executive order,
right,
is always my first response when they say Trump doesn't care about the Jews. I'm like, you know that every action that's brought around the country against the university, whether it's successful or not, it's another question, is because of Trump.
Yep.
Yeah, and Title VI actions, I brought one against UC Berkeley Law School. They're all just sitting there. They said there was going to be one sort of generic, general response from the Department of Education, but we know nothing's going to come out of the Department of Education until there's a new president. So let's talk about that a little bit. I know it's noisy in the back. Hopefully the editing can cut it out. We're in the middle of the conference. But tell me about how you see the presidential, how you see New York in the presidential, and then just sort of nationally, how you're seeing the elections. The numbers are starting to shift back towards Trump. We have the debate next week. So tell me how you're looking at things.
I think that President Trump is in a very strong position to win. We are working very hard as surrogates across the country. If you look at polling, here we are in Nevada. President Trump is polling ahead in Nevada. And the more the American people see and hear Kamala Harris, the worse her numbers are going to get. The more they learn about her record and her policies, the worse her numbers are going to get. I thought her interview that she did jointly with Tim Walz, which was a disgrace. It was the first interview weeks after becoming the nominee. Yeah. I mean, when you run for House of Representatives, you do an interview like the first day. That's a normal process. The fact that she was the presidential candidate and took over a month to do a joint interview and still hasn't done a single interview, it's a disgrace. President Trump brings strength. Kamala Harris brings weakness. And again, voters need to look through the bias of the mainstream media, look at the facts, look at the success economically, foreign policy, energy across the board under President Trump, safety and security, versus the horrible economy, historic inflation, sky-high utility, insurance, and energy prices, horribly weak foreign policy when our allies are under attack. That's all under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. So when Kamala Harris talks about day one, she had day one. It was their first day in office, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris, and they failed.
Yeah, and the big answer she had on day one, which is literally the most softball question you can get as an elected official running for any office. What are you going to do your first? What are you going to do your first day? What are you going to do? What do you want to accomplish? And she couldn't even give an answer. She said, the middle class. I'm going to support the middle class. But that's where we are, and thankfully we have people like you that are putting in the work, not just in Congress, but for the party across the country, for the presidential, also personally for the Jewish Americans. You're doing so much work. So thank you for your time, and I hope to see you move on to bigger and bigger things.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone.